The wind makes no sound when it slips beneath the door, only the soft sigh of your child, stirring in the dark, still hungry. Outside, the frost has claimed the last row of turnips. Inside, the hearth is cold as a grave, and the thin broth on your tongue tastes only of memory. You press your hand against your chest, as if warmth might grow there, summoned by will alone. But the firewood is gone, the stores are empty, and winter has only just begun. The year is 1316. The rains have not stopped in months. The harvest has failed, and famine has come to Europe, not with swords, but with silence. Would you survive it? If this story chills your heart or stirs your soul, tell me, could you have endured a night like that? Subscribe, and walk with me through the silent shadows of history. It began with the sound of dripping. Not the heavy percussion of a storm, nor the gentle patter of spring's first thaw, but a steady, sullen tapping. Day after day, hour after hour, a rhythm so constant it no longer registered as noise, but as presence. You awoke to it, as you had for weeks now. The scent of wet earth and spoiled grain curling in from the rafters above your straw bed. The wood beams groaned with damp. The air itself was heavy with decay. A silence grown thick, like bread gone sour, and on this morning, the first of many, the baker had no bread. If this story speaks to something quiet in your soul, remember to subscribe and share the silence with others who listen. And tell me, could you have endured the first day with no bread? You push open your door, and the world outside greets you not with wind, nor with birdsong, but with mud. Thick, swallowing, endless. The lane where children once ran barefoot is now a winding stream of muck and standing water, its ruts filled with sky-coloured pools. You step carefully, your feet wrapped in burlap to protect against the cold. Your boots, long since torn, hang useless by the hearth. The market square is quieter than it should be. Gone are the low hums of barter and gossip, the bright chatter of women trading carrots for cloth. In their place, only the slap of footfall in wet earth, and the creak of carts heavy with nothing. You make your way to the baker's stall, where the smell of ash used to mingle with warm flour and yeast. But there is no scent now, no loaves rising golden in the oven, no queue of tired labourers trading copper coins for breakfast. Just an empty wooden board and a small smeared slate, upon which is written in trembling chalk, "No bread. The grain is gone." A child tugs at her mother's sleeve, whispering, "Why is he closed?" Her voice is like glass, fragile and sharp. The mother doesn't answer. She only pulls the girl close and walks on, eyes fixed on nothing. Your neighbour Thomas trudges past you, his shoulders stooped, his cloak damp at the hem. He glances at the empty stall, then at the sky, his face twisted into something between fear and blame. "It's judgment," he mutters, voice barely audible above the wind. "A flood without water, a punishment that falls like mist." You want to argue, to say that it's just rain, that this is only weather, and weather has no conscience. But you cannot, because in your own chest, doubt has begun to root. You pass the chapel on your way home. The bell is still, but the priest stands outside beneath the stone arch, robes clinging to his frame, damp and sagging. He holds a cross in one hand, a bowl in the other. A beggar, not a shepherd. He offers blessings to those who pass, though few meet his gaze. You nod as you approach. He nods in return. "Have faith," he says softly, voice rasping like a broom over stone. It is the testing season, but in his eyes, you see shadows, the kind that flicker behind hope and do not leave when prayers are spoken aloud. The days pass, though you no longer measure them by sun or by task, but by how much rot has crept into the cellar. The sacks of grain you laid up last autumn, carefully dried, carefully wrapped, now bear a sickly green fuzz. The smell is unbearable, but worse than that is the sound. The crunch of spoiled grain beneath your fingertips as you lift the sack and pour out what cannot be saved. You take the least bad and rinse it, again and again. You boil it with dried nettle and a pinch of salt, and serve it in wooden bowls that once held richer meals. The children eat slowly. You tell them to savour it, and they do, but their eyes betray the truth. They are already hungry again. A knock comes at your door the next morning. It is not unusual. Neighbours have always leaned on one another. But this knock is different. It carries no rhythm, no warmth. You open the door to find a boy, no more than 12, soaked to the bone and holding out an empty basket. My mother sent me, he says. She heard you had barley. You do not. Not truly, but there's a handful left in a jar near the hearth. Enough for one meal, maybe two. You look at the boy. His cheeks are sunken, his eyes hollow with fatigue. You give him the barley without speaking, and he nods once before disappearing back into the rain. Inside, the hearth crackles weakly. The firewood is nearly gone. The logs burn faster when they are damp. You ration the kindling, mixing it with peat and whatever dry straw you can find. The smoke is thick and bitter, stinging your eyes, but the warmth, what little there is, keeps you from curling into yourself like bark in winter. That evening, you lie awake and listen, not to voices, for there are none, not to laughter which is gone, but to the sound of dripping, always dripping, from the roof, from the eaves, from the corners of the world itself, and beneath it all, something older, something vast, not a roar, not a scream, but a breaking, a quiet unraveling of the world as you knew it, not in flame, not in flood, but in the soft, constant erosion of bread into mud. The house smells different now, not of wood smoke or drying herbs, not of broth simmering slow and steady in the iron pot. No, it smells of rot, a sweet, sickly odor that clings to the beams and rises from the floorboards, heavy as fog. It wraps around your clothes, settles in your hair, seeps into the walls like grief. You rise in the dim grey light of early morning, not from rest, but because sleep no longer holds you. Hunger wakes you. It curls in your belly like a knot, tight and growing tighter. You move through the house slowly, feet bare on cold stone, and begin your morning ritual, not of feeding but of hoping. In the larder, once lined with sacks of barley and rye, there is only silence now. You lift the cloth on the last bin, and find the grain blackened, streaked with mildew. When you press your fingers into the pile, it crumbles like damp parchment. You lift your hand to your nose, and recoil. It smells of earth and sickness. You let the cloth fall. The potatoes have gone soft. Eyes sprout from their skins like tiny limbs, twisted and pale. They lie together in the basket like corpses that refuse to decay quietly. One has burst, leaking a sour wetness that soaks through the straw. You carry them to the fire and cut away the worst. What's left is little scraps of flesh, bitter and bruised. You throw them into the pot with yesterday's water and a pinch of salt from a nearly empty horn. No meat, no roots, only boiled memory. The fire hisses, the broth steams. It fills the house with a warmth that smells like nothing. The children sit close, staring at the pot as if watching it might summon flavor. They do not ask what's in it. They know better now. You eat slowly, careful to chew each piece as if it were more than it is. The texture is soft, unyielding. The taste is flat, but it is warm. That is enough. For now, you step outside into air thick with smoke. Not the sweet scent of cooking fires, but the acrid, clinging smoke of wet wood. The neighbors are burning what they can, chairs, broken barrels, bits of old fencing. You see a boy dragging a stool into the courtyard, too short to lift it properly. A man follows him, axe in hand. The stool was once carved with roses. Now it is firewood. The village smells like ash and mould. The smoke lingers low, curling around the knees of passers-by like a dog too tired to bark. The sky above remains grey, smeared with rain, that does not fall, but threatens. You cannot remember when you last saw the sun. You walk toward the square, past doors that are closed tighter than before. No laughter leaks from windows, no smell of stew, only silence and the constant whisper of wind through the rafters. A woman kneels beside a stream that used to run clear. Now it trickles sluggishly, choked with leaves and filth. She rinses a cloth stained with something dark, scrubbing it against a rock. Her knuckles are red and raw. A child waits nearby, chewing the edge of his sleeve. At the well, someone has left a bowl of boiled grass. You hear whispers. They say the widow made it, then left it for anyone braver than she. You crouch beside it, nose close. It smells of wet leather. You do not take it. Not yet. In the tavern, the benches are still there, but no one speaks above a whisper. The fire burns low, fed with splinters and twigs. You see an old man warming his hands over the coals. His fingers are long and thin, the nails dark with soot. He wears a robe that might once have been a monk's or a blanket. You hear no music. No dice. Just the creak of timber and the murmur of hunger. Someone tells you that dogs are disappearing. You do not ask where they've gone. You return home and open the cupboard where the milk jug once stood. The cloth you wrapped around the rim is damp, the bottom of the vessel ringed with curdled white. It smells sharp, like vinegar and loss. You close the lid and do not look again. You remember a wedding in spring, not long ago. The tables had been piled with cheese and rabbit pie, apples stewed in honey, cakes dusted with flour from the Lord's mill. The bride had worn blue. Her hair was braided with rosemary. Now the rosemary dries above your door, brittle and unused. You pluck a sprig and drop it into the pot, not for taste, but for memory. That night, your youngest asks why the dogs don't bark anymore. You do not answer. Instead, you wrap her in a blanket and hold her close, her breath warm against your chest. You tell her the sun is only sleeping, and you pray she never dreams of meat. The tavern used to breathe. It used to pulse with the rhythm of life. Tankards clinking, chairs scraping, voices rising in song or quarrel, then falling again into laughter. Even the floor seemed to hum with warmth, soaked in wine and stories too old to trace. Now it holds its breath. You push the door open and step inside, careful not to make a sound. The hinges groan, a slow metal sigh that draws every eye, but no one speaks. They look, then turn away, retreating into silence like mice under a hawk's shadow. The air is thick with smoke, but not the rich scent of roasting meat or spiced ale. This smoke is wood, barely dry enough to burn, laced with mildew and desperation. It clings to your skin, stings your eyes. A fire flickers in the hearth, its flames too small to reach the corners of the room. You see faces you know thinner now, quieter. Men who once shouted your name across the square now stare at their hands, hunched over empty mugs. The barkeep, once round as a hog, and twice as loud, wipes the counter with a rag already damp with yesterday's ash. His apron hangs loose on his frame, eyes bloodshot from more than just smoke. There is no music, no dice, no muttered bets over chess pieces carved from bone. Just the creak of chairs and the occasional cough. The stories have stopped, as if words themselves cost too much to spend. The old man is missing. Gavrick, who used to sit near the hearth with a feather tucked in his cap, spinning tales from the time of kings. He'd sell stories for scraps, trade a tale of dragons for half a carrot, a memory of battle for a swallow of cider. You used to sit with your children and listen, their eyes wide, mouths open, hands clasped in wonder. You ask the barkeep what happened to him. Sold his coat for barley, he says, not looking up. Went to the woods. Didn't come back. That's all. That's enough. The stool by the fire where Gavrick sat is empty now, its cushion sagging like a breath let out too long ago. Someone has laid a glove there, as if to say, this seat is waiting. You stay only a short while. You have no coin, no story, no laughter. Outside, the village feels thinner than it did yesterday, as if the wind has taken more than just leaves. You walk past shuttered homes, doors barred with rope or rusted iron. Curtains hang like old wounds, no longer stirred by breath or light. You decide to visit your cousin's house, Alric, who kept bees and sang at every feast. His home is nestled behind the chapel, half hidden by elderberry and thistle. You pass the fence, now overgrown and broken, and step up to the door. The shutters are nailed shut. The thatch is sagging. You knock once, no answer. You knock again. The sound is too loud, too hollow. Still, no answer. You place your hand on the door. It's cold. You press your ear to the wood, and hear only silence. No footsteps, no rustling, not even the creak of a floorboard or a whisper of breath. You leave a sprig of rosemary on the threshold. It's all you can give. On your way home, you pass the butcher's house. A single candle burns in the window, a weak, flickering flame. You glimpse his daughter inside, arms folded on the table, head resting on them like she's waiting for something that will never arrive. A dog barks once far off, then nothing. At night, you sit by the fire and count the sounds, not for comfort, but to remember. The drip of water into the basin, the wind pressing against the shutters, the slow crackle of what little wood remains, then something sharp, a twig snapping, just beyond the wall. You stiffen. You listen harder, silent, the kind that makes you feel like the world is listening back. Your wife stirs in her sleep. The children breathe shallowly beneath their blankets, cheeks hollow and limbs too still. You reach for your knife, dull but real, and lay it near the hearth. It is not robbers you fear, not wolves, not thieves. It is the sound of nothing. You dream of noise, of markets brimming with voices, of music in the square, of Gavrick's laugh echoing against the stone walls. You dream of a bell ringing, not for morning, but for midday bread. But when you wake, all you hear is wind, and your own heartbeat, louder than it should be. The village no longer sings, it waits. It did not fall like a storm, not in great roaring sheets, nor with lightning's fire and thunder's voice. The rain came quiet, constant, soft as breath, and just as impossible to hold back. It was not a beginning, not anymore. It had become something else, a condition, a presence, a slow unraveling of the world you once knew. You lived beside it now, slept to its rhythm, walked in its shadow, worked in its weight. You no longer remembered dry earth, only mud, thick, sucking, unrepentant. The soil had turned to soup, the roads to rivers, the roots to rot. The fields behind your cottage once shimmered golden in summer. Now they lie drowned beneath standing water, their bent stalks twisted and broken like the ribs of a sunken ship. The wheat has blackened, the barley never rose, even the weeds give up the fight. You wake in the night to its sound, not a drumbeat, not a song, but a whisper, always, dripping from the rafters, sliding down the stones, pooling beneath the door. You patch what you can, stuff rags in cracks, hang old cloaks over the worst of the leaks. Still it finds you, still it seeps into your dreams. In the churchyard, the graves are sinking. Stones tilt like weary faces, soil washing away with each passing day. You pass them as you fetch water from the well, and you feel it, the way the ground squelches beneath your step. The dead are not resting easy. One afternoon, you see the priest standing ankle-deep in water, his cassock plastered to his legs. He is shoveling mud from the chapel steps, sweat on his brow despite the chill. His face is lined not with age, but with sorrow. You offer to help. He nods, wordless. You shovel together in silence, and when it is done, he invites you inside. The chapel smells of wet wood and old incense. Candles sputter weakly, mould curls at the corners of the altar cloth. He speaks of God's mercy, of storms as trials, of rain as cleansing, but his voice falters, his hands tremble. He announces a fast, 3 days of prayer, of penance, of stillness. You nod, you are already fasting. So is everyone. The bell rings once that evening, not for mass, but for the carpenter's wife. She died in her sleep, they say. You saw her only yesterday, carrying a sack of sodden straw. Her child weeps beside the grave, as the rain continues to fall. No eulogy, only the priest's soft voice, and the dull thump of dirt, turned to sludge. That night, you dream of fire. Not warmth, but hunger. A fire that devours your home, your field, the chapel, the trees, all gone in a rush of smoke. But when you wake, there is only the rain. Your hearth remains cold, the firewood too wet to catch, even after days beside the coals. You burn a broken chair instead. The children don't ask where it came from. The horses die in their stalls, hooves softened by mud, bellies empty, eyes wide and still. You help drag one to the edge of the woods, where crows gather in silence. Watch. The roads disappear. Carts sink to their axles. A messenger arrives from the next village over, soaked through and blue-lipped. He brings no news, only a warning. They've begun rationing candles and salt. Even the light, it seems, must be counted now. You pass your neighbour's window and see her boiling something in a pot. The smell turns your stomach. You do not ask. Each day blends into the next, marked only by the losses. The baker's daughter, gone in the night. The miller's grain, ruined and swept into the stream. The widow's last hen, taken by something in the dark. You sit by the window and watch the sky weep, not in grief, but in apathy. You feel it then, that strange absence, that quiet erasing. Famine is not a blade. It is not a thief in the dark. It is a forgetting, of sound, of taste, of names, of colour. You can no longer remember the warmth of spring. You try, but it slips away, replaced by grey, by wet wool, by hollow bellies, and thinner faces. One evening, you catch your reflection in a rain-slicked window. You do not recognize yourself. Your eyes are ringed with shadow, your mouth drawn tight, your breath fogs the glass, then vanishes. You turn away. The rain still falls. It falls on the thatch and the stone, on the living and the dead, on fields that cannot give and mouths that cannot wait. You wonder if it will ever stop, but you say nothing, because there is nothing left to say. The wool cloak had been your father's, dark brown, with a patch at the shoulder, and the smell of winter still trapped in its seams. You wore it through frost, through weddings, through mourning. It was a cloak worn thin by 1,000 winters, soaked with smoke and memory. Now it is gone. You gave it to a traveller from the southern hills in exchange for a handful of beans, dry and misshapen, cupped like treasure in his cracked palm. He did not look you in the eye as the deal was struck. He only took the cloak, folded it roughly, and walked away before the weight of the trade could settle into either of your bones. You held the beans as if they might vanish. You counted them twice, then a third time, 12. One for each hour the hunger gnawed loudest. Back home you boiled them with water stained green from boiled metal. You fed them to the children first, then your wife, then yourself. They tasted of nothing, but they were not nothing. That is how it begins. The bargains, not with coins, not with market weights and ledgers, but with scraps of history traded for one more day. The baker's wife swaps a silver crucifix, blackened with age, for a few strips of smoked bark, said to come from the coast. The merchant's son sells his boots for a wedge of dried marrow. A mother offers her last candle for half an onion. The midwife gives up her mirror, and no one speaks of shame. Not aloud. In the square, the Lord's steward now oversees the rationing. He wears a woolen cap too fine for the season, and his boots shine even in mud. Behind him, a row of guards, boys, really, stand in formation with pikes taller than themselves. The grain stores are opened only at midday. A horn sounds. The people come. You stand in line, wind cutting through your sleeves, stomach curled inward. The man before you has frost on his beard. The woman behind you clutches an empty cloth sack like it is a child. When your turn comes, the steward reads your name from a list and nods. A scoop of grain is poured into your hands. Not a sack, not a basket, your hands. It's warm from the sunless storeroom. The moment it touches your skin, you know it will not be enough. You thank him anyway. That night, you grind the grain with a stone, mix it with water, and bake a flat cake on the hearth. It burns at the edges. You eat it in silence, chewing slowly, watching your family do the same. Your daughter asks, "Will there be more tomorrow?" You want to say yes. You say nothing. Later, by the fire, you talk in hushed tones with your wife. She speaks of the goat you once raised. Old now, no longer milked, she says it softly, like a confession. You nod. And in the morning, the goat is gone. Not slaughtered in the square, not paraded as meat. Just. You hear a story, that someone traded 3 eggs for a jar of honey. Another tale says, the miller accepted a pair of iron scissors for a stale wheel of cheese. You do not know what is true anymore, but even lies feel like maps now, pointing towards something, anything, worth walking toward. In the chapel, the priest has stopped wearing his gold-threaded stole. He wears wool now, plain and faded. His voice remains calm, but his hands tremble as he lifts the cup. There is no wine inside, only rainwater and memory. You kneel, and he gives you a blessing. It feels lighter than it once did. You wonder what he gave up. Outside, someone offers to trade a pair of shoes, both left feet for dried turnip peelings. A boy with blisters on his heels shakes his head and walks. You see children digging at the edge of the woods, searching for chestnuts that never grew. Their hands are raw, their eyes never rise to meet yours. In town, a man with a cart sells cabbage stew. You know it's not cabbage, but you give him a handful of rags for it anyway. He nods solemnly, and you sit on the edge of a frozen well and eat it from a carved wooden spoon, the taste sharp and sour, but real. Everything now is memory turned into currency. The past bartered away, one stitch at a time. You give up the quilt that was your wedding gift, the bellows from your hearth, the comb your mother left you. You stop counting what is gone, and you begin counting only what remains. The howl carries on the wind like a song forgotten by the world, long, low, and trembling, not in triumph, but in need. You hear it just before dawn, when the dark is still thick, and the embers in the hearth have collapsed to a sigh. It drifts in through the thatch, through the shutters, through your skin. You rise slowly, pulling the ragged blanket from your shoulders. Your breath fogs before you. You step across the packed dirt floor, careful not to wake the children. One curls beneath the table, wrapped in your old tunic. Another lies with his arm over the dog's empty bed. You pause at the door, ear pressed to the wood. The sound comes again, closer this time. The wolves are no longer in the forest. They have come down from the hills. They wander the fields now, gaunt and low to the ground, eyes glowing like coals. They no longer fear your fences. They no longer wait for snow to fall. In other winters, it was robbers you feared. Those desperate men who travelled under moonlight with knives in their cloaks. But now it is those with hollow bellies and blank stares. Those who were once your neighbours. Those who would knock for bread and take more. You venture into the woods by midday. The forest that once offered shelter. Berries in the summer, kindling in the fall, mushrooms tucked beneath leaves, is stripped bare. Branches broken, bark carved and missing. Even the moss has been scraped away. You carry a sack and a dull blade. You look for roots. Anything edible. Anything not yet claimed. You find nothing. No berries, no bird song, no footprints but your own. Even the rabbits have gone. The silence in the forest is not peaceful. It presses in, heavy as snow. You walk farther than you should, heart pounding with each crunch of frost beneath your boots. Your mouth is dry, your legs ache. Then ahead, a paw print. Deep, larger than your own hand. You kneel beside it. The soil around it is torn where claws rake the mud. You stand, and you turn back. Not quickly, slowly, as if your stillness might make you invisible. Back in the village, a boy is missing. They whisper it at the well. He went to the stream for water, and did not return. His mother stands in the square with wild eyes, hands wringing the hem of her dress, until it tears. The men search. They find only his wooden pail, half submerged at the edge of the frozen marsh. No blood, no prints, just silence. You sit by the fire that night, the children asleep, your wife curled beside you. You add the last dry twig to the flames. It smokes before it catches. You stare into it, not seeking warmth, but distraction. Then, outside, a creak, a shift, a footstep. You rise, open the door, just wind. But you see it, at the edge of the dark, eyes reflecting firelight, then gone. You bar the door with a plank of alder and sit awake until dawn. The next day, the blacksmith's son tells you he saw something in the trees. Not a wolf, he says, a man. But walking low, face thin as bark, eyes sunken, not right. You nod, say nothing. You have heard of this before, the blurring of lines between man and beast when hunger has taken too much, when reason breaks and leaves only instinct. You pray it's only wolves. You go to the chapel, kneel beside the altar. The priest says nothing, only rests a hand on your shoulder. It is not comfort, it is solidarity. You are both afraid. The bell rings again at dusk. Another burial, another name forgotten before it can be carved in stone. You wrap the children in every cloth you own, stack crates and chairs against the door. You sleep in shifts, knife near your hand, ears open to the wind. The forest presses closer each day, not with leaves and branches, but with eyes and absence. The wolves are not just creatures now, they are symbols of how far the world has turned, of how close the edge has come. You close your eyes and dream of barking dogs, of fences that held, of nights where sleep was deep and undisturbed. But in the waking dark, you listen, and you wait. The bell rings at noon, but it does not sound like a call to prayer. It sounds like a lament, a hollow clang, carried on the cold wind across the muddy path that winds uphill to the stone-bellied monastery. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, the one patched at the elbow, mended twice, and still too thin, and begin the climb. Your stomach is a hollow drum. It has not known fullness in many days, not even warmth. The monastery rises above the trees, its walls slick with moss, its windows narrow and dark. Once you saw it as a place of certainty, eternal and unmoved. Now, it seems as fragile as the rest of the world, as if even stone can hunger. You are not the only one to come. Others are gathered by the gate. Faces you know, though thinner now. A man who once carved violins stands beside a woman who stitched altar cloths. A widow cradles a child too quiet for his age. They do not speak. Words feel greedy these days. A monk opens the gate. He is young, younger than you remember monks being, with eyes rimmed red and a robe that hangs from him like bark from a dying tree. Inside, the cloister smells of candle smoke and rain. The garden is ruined, herbs drowned, beds washed clean of seed. A single cabbage leaf clings to life at the edge of a flooded trench. You are led to the refectory, once a hall of humble plenty, barley broth, rye loaves, cheese waxed in bee skin. It is now an echoing chamber of empty bowls. The monk, whose name is Brother Thomas, places a crust in your hand, hard as stone, dark as bark. It is barely bread, but it is bread. You nod your thanks and sit by the fireless hearth. Across from you, a weaver picks crumbs from his lap and eats them one by one. Brother Thomas sits beside you. He does not offer more food, only a story. He speaks softly, voice woven with care, about the famine of long ago. One that scorched the Southlands, left fields to dust, and drove people to boil their boots for soup. He says faith endured, even then, that some survived because they shared, but others did not, because they did not. He tells of saints who walked barefoot through famine, who fed crowds with a single fish, who wept for the weak and the forgotten. He speaks not to comfort, but to remind. You ask him if he believes it. He looks at you. His eyes are honest. Tired. He says, some days, outside, the wind picks up, sweeping through the monastery arches with a sigh like an old man's breath. Brother Thomas touches your shoulder. Take what hope you can, he says, even if it is small. You ask him if the monks have enough. He smiles without teeth. We have what we need to pray, he says. Not always what we need to live. Later, you walk the cloister alone. Footsteps echo against stone. In a narrow alcove, a candle burns beside the statue of a saint, thin and sorrowful, palms turned upward in surrender or offering. You need not to ask for food, but for the strength to walk home without weeping. The bells toll again at dusk, 7 times. Brother Thomas tells you each peal marks the passing of a soul. You watch him bow his head and whisper a name. He does not cry. You do. You leave as the sky purples. The others have already gone, drifting like ghosts back down the hill. You clutch the crust in your hand, uneaten. It is your offering now, a proof that someone shared. As you pass the chapel door, you hear a hymn, barely sung, almost whispered. The Latin, unfamiliar, but the ache in the notes all too known. You do not sing, but your lips form the words, just the same. That night, you break the crust into 4 pieces, one for each child, one for your wife. You do not eat. You hold your silence like a prayer, and listen for bells. The smell hits you before you even step inside, bitter, acrid, and strange, like something meant to burn, not to feed. You duck beneath the low beam of your neighbour's door, and enter her smoke-laced hovel, where the air is thick and the pot on the hearth bubbles with black water. She stands over it, stirring slowly, her hand wrapped in cloth. The spoon scrapes the bottom with a sound like bone against stone. You ask her what it is. She says, ash bark. You do not answer. She takes a pinch of grey powder from a clay bowl, crushed from the burnt bark of a fallen tree, and sprinkles it into the bubbling broth. The room smells like winter's chimney, like damp wood after flame. She tells you it thickens the soup, makes it feel more than it is. You watch her ladle it out, first to her sons, who sit cross-legged on the floor, eyes too big for their faces. They do not smile. They do not speak. They simply drink. Then she offers you a cup. You hesitate. Then take it. The taste is worse than the smell. Ash and rainwater. No salt, no root, no meat, just warmth, and the memory of something close to food. You sip it slowly. Back home, your wife is boiling something too. Roots dug from behind the stable, the kind meant for animals, not men. You sit with her in silence, children curled like kittens around the hearth. Even the dog is gone now. You think of the time, not so long ago, when there was meat on the table. Real meat. You remember the wedding feast last spring, roasted hare, wild herbs, stewed fruit thick with honey. You remember laughter and music and bellies too full to dance. You remember the smell of spiced cider, the stickiness of it on your fingers. That memory is cruel now. The bowl your wife hands you is wooden, cracked at the rim. The broth is thin. Something floats in it. A wilted leaf, maybe. You drink it down without asking. You go to sleep that night and dream of butter, of cheese, of apples. You wake with your stomach tighter than before. In the morning, the old man down the lane is digging near the barn. He says he's looking for turnips, though no one's planted there in years. You watch as he pulls up a fistful of tangled roots, most of them inedible, some half frozen. He stuffs them into a bag with shaking hands and mutters a prayer you can't hear. The girl who lives near the smithy eats clay now. Her mother makes her stop, but only after the third time. Her lips are cracked, her belly swollen. The priest says it's not hunger, but madness. You know it's both. Someone tried to boil leather last week. A belt, boiled 3 times to soften it, then chewed until the tongue bled. You hear this at the well. You do not ask whose belt. It could have been yours. The rats are fewer now. The cat's gone entirely. Even the crows, once bold and circling, seem to know better. You open your larder and find only a smear of grain dust at the bottom of a sack. You rub your finger through it, as if something might appear, as if touch could conjure what the world has withheld. You scrape it into the pot anyway, add water, whisper to it, as though it might thicken, might become something more than what it is. That evening, your youngest asks if God is hungry too. You don't answer. You watch the fire. You listen to the wind. A neighbor knocks, not for food, but to trade. He offers 3 sticks of wood for a pinch of salt. You have none. He nods and leaves. You watch him go, hunched against the cold, footsteps soft in the mud. Later the children sleep. You lie awake beside your wife, her breath shallow, her arms thin as bundled reeds. The pot on the hearth still simmers, ash and root, bark and broth. You rise, stir it, taste, and you do not weep. There are no tears left to give. The night falls too early now, not just by the clock, but in your bones, a darkness that arrives long before the sun disappears, and with it, a wind, not a storm wind, nor one filled with sleet or dust, but a wind that carries nothing at all. No smell of hay, no drift of dung or smoke, no bread from an oven, no stew from a hearth, no life. You notice it as you step outside to check the shutters. It brushes past your cheek like a stranger who once knew your name. You inhale instinctively, searching for the warmth of something, anything, but there is only the cold scent of absence. Even decay has a smell. This does not. You wrap yourself tighter in the patchwork cloak and glance toward the village. Lights flicker in only a few homes now. Many stand empty, some shuttered by boards, some hollowed from within. A silence lies over the village like snow, except there is no snow, only mud, only the wind. You pass the baker's house. His windows are dark. The old sign swings in the wind with a tired creak, the wooden loaf, faded and chipped. Once, that creak was a comfort. Now, it makes you flinch. The dogs no longer bark. Even the crows, those harbingers of hunger, seem to have grown silent, as though the world has nothing left to feed them. You return home and bar the door with a rusted iron rod. It groans in its slot, echoing louder than it should. Inside, the hearth is cold. You did not light it tonight. There was nothing left to cook. Only the memory of warmth. Your wife sleeps beneath the quilt, with the children, their bodies pressed close like coals trying not to go out. You sit beside them and pull your knees to your chest. The wind pushes against the walls again, not violently, not enough to shake the shutters, just enough to remind you that it is there, watching, waiting. You recall, not long ago, the smell of the earth after rain, of wheat just beginning to sprout, the sweet, pungent breath of cattle, the steam rising from their backs in early spring. Even the tang of dung had a kind of comfort, a sign of cycles, of life still turning. Now there is nothing. Even the wind seems tired. You rise and step to the window. Through a crack in the shutter, you see the village street slick with black mud, lined with footprints that do not lead anywhere. No voices call out. No laughter. No shouting. only the wind weaving between walls like a forgotten prayer. You think of your father's stories of storms that tore roofs from homes, of floods that carved new rivers through the valley. But none of those left the land so still. This famine is not a roaring lion. It is a slow exhale. You walk to the cupboard and open it. Even though you know what you will find. A bowl, an empty sack, a wooden spoon, the ghosts of meals. You place the bowl on the table and sit before it, as if waiting for something to appear. Nothing does. There are footsteps outside. You freeze. Not the slow gait of a neighbor, not the clatter of a cart. Just a single step, then another, then stillness. You move to the door, press your ear against it. Silence. The kind that feels like breath held. You do not open it. You do not speak. Instead, you return to the hearth and sit again, hands resting on your knees. You close your eyes and imagine the wind carrying something. The scent of soup, the faint ring of a cowbell, the dusty comfort of old straw. But still, it carries nothing. And you understand now, this is what hunger becomes, in the end. Not just the ache of an empty belly, but the hollowing of the world itself. A place where even the wind forgets to carry life. The door groans open on the third knock. You had not expected her to answer. No one had seen the widow in days. Not at the well, not at the chapel, not even passing by with her wicker basket wrapped in linen. But here she stands now, thin as a shadow, her hand trembling on the latch. You ask if she needs anything. She does not answer, only steps aside, leaving the way open. Her home smells of dust and wax and the dry rot of old wood. No fire warms the hearth, no pot simmers. The shutters are closed, the light inside so faint it seems the shadows themselves are trying not to disturb her. But in the center of the table sits a candle, half burnt, its wick curved like a question mark, the flame small and steady. She sees you looking. "It's all I've got left," she says softly, "but I can spare half." She cuts the stub in two with a rusted blade and presses the smaller piece into your palm. "For hope," she adds, her voice the whisper of parchment turning in a book, no longer read. You thank her. You don't know what else to say. She sits then, slowly, as if the chair might crumble beneath her. You take the seat across, your fingers wrapped around the stub of wax like it might melt into something fuller. Outside, the wind brushes against the shuttered panes, but inside, it is still. She begins to speak, not of now, not of the rot or the ruin, the silence or the hunger. She speaks of before, of summer. She tells you of a day so warm, the bees fell asleep on the blossoms, of apples so round and full, they snapped their own branches, of laughter by the stream where her husband once sang, voice sharp and clear as a church bell. You listen, not out of politeness, but because it feels like stepping through a door, back into a place where bread was common and hunger was a thing, whispered about from faraway lands. You add your own stories, of hay stacked high enough to climb, of stew thick with lentils, of your daughter's cheeks rosy from sun and strawberries. For a moment it is not winter, not famine, not grief. It is a warm afternoon, and the fire crackles, and your bellies are full. The candle burns lower between you. You glance around the room. There is so little here. A stool, a bowl, a single cross on the wall. But nothing feels empty, not tonight. She tells you of the songs they used to sing on the Feast of St. Bridget. You remember them. You hum a line. She joins in, her voice thin but steady, and the song becomes a lifeline stretched between two hearts. When it ends, neither of you speaks. The flame gutters slightly, flickering against the wax that pulls at its base. She looks at it and says, "It's not the light that matters most, it's what we choose to see by it." You carry those words with you as you rise to go. She does not walk you to the door. She only nods. You step into the night, the candle stub wrapped in cloth inside your coat, its warmth still caught in your hand. The cold bites harder now, but something inside resists it. At home, your wife watches as you unwrap the gift and place it on the mantel. The children crowd near. You light it. And as the flame rises, no taller than a blade of grass, it fills the room with more than light. It fills it with memory. With the sound of apples dropping in a summer orchard. With voices rising in song. With warmth pulled from the edges of the past. You do not eat tonight, but you are fed. He arrives near dusk. Just as the sky shifts from dull pewter to ash streaked charcoal, you see him first from your doorway. A solitary figure pulling a rickety cart, its wheels creaking like old bones over the mud-hardened path. There's nothing in it. No hay, no sacks, no firewood, just emptiness, rolling into a village that's forgotten the shape of visitors. He doesn't knock. He waits near the well, breath rising in thin puffs. His cloak is shredded at the hem, boots caked with miles of someone else's road. His face is lean, not just from hunger, but from seeing too much. You approach him cautiously, one hand on the gate, the other inside your coat. He nods, says nothing at first, just lets the silence sit between you like a third person. "I've come from the sea," he finally says, voice cracked like old leather. There's no bread there either. You ask what he wants. He shrugs. Nothing to give, nothing to take. You motion him toward the inn, though it's long since stopped serving. The innkeeper lets him inside anyway, out of the cold, and starts a fire with scraps from a broken stool. The stranger sits, hands outstretched toward the flickering heat, as if trying to remember what warmth used to feel like. Others gather. There's no food, but stories like hunger are shared easily. He tells of a village far to the west beyond the salt marshes, where people survived not because they had more, but because they gave more. They foraged together, he says. Shared roots, boiled mosses, bark turned into cakes. With river silt and a little patience, a child there learned to fish with thread and thorns. An old woman fed 10 people with the same pot of broth, 3 days in a row. Someone asks if he's lying. He smiles. Maybe, he says. But even a lie can keep you walking. No one laughs. But no one leaves. You sit by the fire as he speaks of strange remedies. Tea made from nettle and ash, cheese squeezed from curdled goat milk, no one else would touch. You imagine it, bitter and coarse, and yet somehow beautiful in its defiance. A man in the corner shakes his head. No one survives like that. The stranger only replies, and yet, they did. Outside, the wind pushes against the shuttered windows. The stranger shifts closer to the flame. He tells you about a boy who gave up his own portion to feed a stranger passing through. That stranger, he claims, returned weeks later with dried mushrooms and salted eel. One act, he says, and the wheel turns. You ask him if he saw it himself. He doesn't answer. He reaches into his cloak and pulls out a small square of cloth, oil-stained and folded many times. Inside it, a few strands of dried moss. He holds it out. Not as proof, as a gesture. You take it. You do not eat it. You keep it. A woman asks where he'll go next. Where the roads end, he says, and where the stories don't. He sleeps in the church that night, curled beneath the altar, his cart parked just outside. In the morning, he's gone. No footprints in the frost. No sign of passage, save the quiet hush of something that feels like belief. You return to your home. You take out a pot and pour water in. You crush the moss gently between your fingers. Not enough to feed, but maybe enough to hope. The cold settles in before the sun even falls. It creeps into the spaces between floorboards and seeps through the stones of the hearth, winding around ankles, climbing spines. You feel it first in your breath, which hovers before you like pale ghosts, then in your fingertips, which go numb, even wrapped beneath rags. There is no wind tonight, no snow, just a stillness, so profound it feels like the world has been exhaled and left empty. Inside your home, the fire has gone out. You'd burned the last of the dry wood yesterday. The final splintered stool, the broken handle of a rusted spade. There's nothing left to burn except what still must be used. You consider the shelves, the table, even the wooden cradle tucked unused in the corner. But not yet. Your wife gathers the children into one bundle beneath the threadbare quilt, their limbs tangled together like vines in search of warmth. The baby is pressed to her breast. Your eldest wraps arms around the youngest. You lie beside them, shoulder to shoulder, ribs to ribs, a human shield against the gnawing dark. There is no food tonight. None to cook, none to imagine. No one complains. You listen to the sound of your daughter's breath, slow and shallow, a rhythm steadier than your own heart. Each exhale is a small answer to a silent prayer. Outside, the night deepens. The frost grows on the window pane in delicate fractals, patterns too beautiful to belong in a world so starved. You reach out and touch the glass, your finger leaving a brief halo of warmth that fades as soon as it's formed. You try to sleep, but sleep does not come easily on nights like this. You count the embers in the hearth, still faintly red beneath a veil of ash. 1, 2, 3. Then dark. You count the sounds. The tick of settling stone, the soft snore of your son, the shifting weight of the dog, if he were still here. But there is no dog. There is no stew, no song, no light. Only this, the breath of your wife against your collarbone, the whisper of the quilt shifting as a child turns in sleep, the press of time folding in on itself like the edges of a dream you can't remember. You recall the coldest night of your childhood, when the snow had sealed the village in for a week, and your mother had tucked warm stones into the bed, wrapped in cloth. You remember the smell of porridge and her fingers combing through your hair. She is long gone now, but you speak her name into the darkness anyway, mouthing it like a hymn. It warms nothing, but it hurts less than silence. At some point in the night, your wife stirs and reaches for your hand beneath the quilt. Her fingers are stiff, but they close around yours with surprising strength. You squeeze back, eyes still closed. It is the only movement either of you make for hours. You do not dream. There are no dreams left in you tonight, only the ache of limbs pressed too tightly, the numbness that spreads inward from the extremities, the long, slow unfolding of night, like a shroud drawn over the fields. You wonder if it is colder than it has ever been, or if you have simply grown thinner, quieter, more breakable. You wonder what morning will feel like, if it comes. Just before dawn, the frost thickens. You feel it through the stones, you breathe it through your teeth. But then, your son coughs, and the sound is sharp and real, and too alive to belong to death. You open your eyes. The window is pale, with pre-dawn light. No warmth, but light. You turn to your wife. Her eyes are open too. Neither of you speak. The candle stub on the mantel has melted to nothing, but beside it, a single beam of sun slips between the shutters. You breathe. And it is still cold, but you are still here. It begins with a whisper. A rumour traded in lowered voices beside the well, passed beneath breath, like contraband. A riot, they say, in the town beyond the ridge, the one with the granary and the toll bridge. Someone overturned a noble's cart. Someone pried open the grain store with an axe made from a broken fence post. You listen but do not speak. You watch the way others glance around, the way even the old priest keeps his mouth drawn in a tight line. By evening the rumour is no longer a whisper. It is a wind sweeping from door to door, from cottage to cottage. Names emerge, so do numbers. A dozen hung, someone says. 20 homes burned, someone else adds. A child trampled in the chaos. A baker's hands broken. Still, no one knows for certain. Truth and fear have become too easily woven. At night, you sit by the window and watch the darkness. You see lanterns moving in the woods. Not torches of uprising, but hunters of rumour, perhaps. Or guards sent from the manor. You close the shutter and bolt it. You hold your children closer. There is no sleep. In the morning, the village gathers. Not to riot, no one here has the strength, but to wonder, to ache aloud. Some say the rioters were heroes, that they opened the stores for all, shared flour and oats and spoiled barley. Others call them fools, that the grain was burned, that the lords will punish every house in the 100 for what happened in one. You say nothing, but inside you feel the pull, not toward rebellion, toward desperation. You remember the ache in your belly, the fever in your youngest child, the way your wife tore the lining from her coat to patch your son's shoes, and you wonder if the storehouse stood before you, unlocked and full. Would you wait? A boy approaches from the edge of the square. Barefoot, his cloak is a curtain, his belt a rope. He says he came from the town, says he saw it himself. The crowd like a wave, the lords screaming, the fire licking at stone and straw alike. He shows you his hand, blistered, burned. You ask him if it was worth it. He shrugs. Nothing left to lose, he says. The priest announces a fast. You almost laugh, but instead, you return home. There is a single carrot left. You split it into thin slices and boil it in cloudy water. You call it soup, though it does not fill even the cracks between your teeth. Your wife chews slowly, Your children are quiet. No one asks for more. You light no candle tonight. Instead, you sit by the window again. Watch for smoke, for flames, for the shape of change. But the night is still, too still. At dawn, a rider passes through the village. Dust and sweat and a horse too thin to gallop. He bears a banner, not of the king, not of the manor, but of grief. A black strip tied to the hilt of his sword. He says nothing, only rides on. You stand in your doorway and watch him vanish into the trees. Then you step back inside. You take your spade, and instead of joining a riot, you walk to the edge of the field. You press your hand to the soil and whisper to it, because when there is nothing left to take, you must try to give, even if it is only hope. The snow came overnight, soft as ash, blanketing the village in a hush deeper than silence. When you wake, the world is pale and still. Footprints vanish within minutes. Paths you once knew have become riddles. The fields have lost their shape beneath the drifts, and even the trees seem to shiver beneath their white shrouds. You walk carefully. Your boots crack the crust of ice with each step. The air is brittle, so cold it seems to hum against your skin. You don't walk for purpose. There is no bread, no trade, no news. You walk because stillness too long held becomes despair. At the edge of the path, beneath a crooked birch, you see something. Not quite a shape, not quite a shadow. You crouch, brush aside the snow. There, half buried in frost, is a satchel. Leather, stiff and split at the seams. Inside a letter sealed once, but now curled and soaked along the edges. Its ink faded like old breath. The parchment cracks as you unfold it. You read the words aloud, not because anyone is listening, but because silence demands a voice. The writing is slanted, delicate, a woman's hand perhaps. It begins simply, "To anyone who finds this, know that we tried." She writes of a child, her son, 5 winters old, red-cheeked and wide-eyed. She writes of singing to him by the fire, of telling stories of ships and saints and summer meadows. She writes of their journey, how they left the town when the stores emptied, how they followed rumors of a monastery to the north. She does not say his name, but she says this: "He liked to hum when he was afraid. I can still hear him, even now." You pause. Around you, the snow begins to fall again, lightly, as if listening. The letter continues. She speaks of frostbite, of hands turned black, of watching the stars and trying to remember their names. She speaks of faith not as certainty, but as the choice to speak into the dark anyway. At the bottom, a final line, written sideways in a trembling hand. "If spring comes, tell it we were waiting." You fold the letter again gently. The satchel you leave. It is ruined, but the parchment you tuck inside your coat. You return home. That night, by the dim stub of candle gifted by the widow, you read the letter aloud to your family. Your wife holds the children close. Your daughter presses her ear to your chest, listening not to the words but to the shape of them, the sound of them, like a lullaby made of frost. You do not weep, not quite, but your throat thickens around the name that was never spoken. And for a moment, the hunger is not the worst of it. It is the not knowing, the not remembering, the vanishing. Later, after the children sleep, you place the letter inside a wooden box with 2 dried beans and a scrap of blue cloth, a small reliquary of things almost lost. You step outside. The snow has stopped. You breathe deep, searching for the scent of anything. Wood smoke, hay, the rich promise of thaw. There is none. But overhead, the clouds have parted, and for the first time in many weeks, you see stars. You whisper her words to them. "Tell spring we were waiting." It begins without announcement. No trumpets, no sudden warmth, just a subtle change in how the frost feels beneath your boots. Less like glass, more like thawing wax. The snow, once a crusted shield, begins to sink under its own weight. Drips gather at the corners of the roof. A rivulet forms along the edge of the path, where none has run in weeks. The earth, long sealed in a tomb of ice, exhales. You kneel in the field that morning, your knees soaking through as slush seeps into the worn threads of your trousers. You press your hand to the ground, and instead of stone, you find mud. Thick, brown, reluctant mud. It clings to your fingers like memory, cool and resistant. But it moves. It yields. It is not rot. It is not rock. It is earth, and you weep. Not loudly, not in sorrow, but in a strange, shuddering relief that cracks the brittle dam inside your chest. Around the village, others notice the change. The icicles shrink, the well is no longer sealed with frost. A child finds the first worm in the garden and carries it like a relic through the lanes. Your wife smiles, not fully but enough for her eyes to fold at the corners. You return to the field each day. You bring your spade, its blade rusted from neglect and cold. You dig. Slowly, the soil is stubborn, its top still frozen in patches, but beneath it begins to yield. The first furrow you carve feels like writing a letter to the future, one syllable at a time. Others join. The old farmer with hands like gnarled bark, a widow with no tools but 2 bent spoons, children with fingers purple from cold help pull stones from the plots. No one speaks much. The rhythm of effort replaces words. Breath becomes a kind of hymn. You plant what little you have. Seeds saved from last year. Forgotten scraps traded in secret. Onions, peas, barley. A man you barely know hands you 3 potatoes, shriveled and sprouting. They'll grow, he says. You nod. They must. At night, your hands ache. Your nails are caked black. Your palms raw. But the ache feels different than hunger. It feels earth. The priest passes through the field one day, robes muddied to the knee. He does not preach. He only kneels beside a boy planting beans and begins to dig. A raven watches from the trees, not to scavenge, just to witness. You watch the weather now like scripture. Every cloud, every breeze, every flicker of warmth is a verse, a promise, a threat, a negotiation. Some days the frost returns. Briefly, like a reminder. But each time, the earth thaws faster. And you do not stop. You build scarecrows from broken chairs and shredded garments. You hang bits of mirror and shell to glint in the hesitant sun. You press bone meal into the soil. You whisper to the roots. You ask them not for bounty but for enough. Just enough. One morning, a sprout appears. Tiny, pale, almost a mistake. But it is real. You kneel and place your palm beside it. The warmth of your skin meeting the trembling life of something brave enough to grow. And you whisper, thank you. Not to God, not to fate, to the mud, to the thaw, to the wheel that turns, even after it cracks. The scent reaches you before you even step through the threshold, thin but unmistakable, a ghost of time and something deeper, rounder, something like meat, not just boiled bark or grass-steeped water, but broth, true broth. You stand frozen in the doorway, your body unsure whether to believe your own nose. Your neighbour, old Margit, waves you in. Her hands tremble as she ladles it out, not from weakness, but from something like awe. She's boiled beans, real beans, with onion, with herbs gathered in secret during the last days of snowmelt. A bone too, knuckle-thick and speckled with marrow, a gift from a peddler who passed through 3 mornings ago, wrapped in cloth like treasure. She pours you a bowl. You sit by the hearth, where smoke curls gently through the stones, and cradle it in both hands. The heat seeps through the crude wooden bowl into your fingers, into your wrists, into the hollow behind your ribs. You do not eat right away. You stare. The steam rises. You can see the shimmer of fat along the surface, thin circles catching the light. The herbs cling to the sides. A piece of carrot, real carrot, drifts to the bottom and bobs back up again. You sip. It is not rich. It is not thick. But it is real. Salt. Earth. Something like comfort. Your throat tightens. You swallow it, not just with your tongue, but with your whole being. Every inch of you receives it like blessing. Your body remembers this. Remembers flavor, nourishment. The way food can be more than survival. You cry. Quietly. No sobs. Just tears slipping down without effort. Like the snow melt that coaxed life from sleeping roots. You cry not because it's delicious, but because it exists, because it should not, because it does. Margit watches you without speaking. Her eyes glisten too. Her mouth makes the shape of a smile, but her face is too tired to hold it for long. She eats beside you, spoon clinking against bowl, the rhythm of a world being remade. Outside, children are playing again. Their laughter still lacks music, but it is sound. A boy runs past the window with a stick in hand, chasing a dog you thought had vanished weeks ago. You eat slowly. Each spoonful is sacred. The soup warms you from the inside out, not just your body, but the places inside that had grown quiet. Your memories stir. You remember a festival once, years ago. Apple stew, goat cheese. A song your mother used to hum as she cooked. The soup tastes nothing like those things, and yet it brings them back. Afterward, Margit offers you the last heel of a loaf she's been hiding, baked with acorn flour and laced with old barley. It's dense, chewy, you hold it like a reliquary before biting. You take it home and share it with your wife and children, tearing it into pieces, dipping it in the broth you've carried back in a gourd. They eat in silence, like worshippers. Even your youngest does not cry tonight. When the candle is lit, the house feels warmer than it has in months. Not because the fire is strong, but because the hunger is for once silent. You fall asleep with the taste still on your tongue, earthy, bitter, faintly sweet. And in your dreams, there is a table. A feast not yet real, but wait. It rains again. You hear it first in the dark. The soft patter against the thatch, hesitant, almost polite. Not the heavy weeping of the long famine months. Not the endless deluge that turned bread into rotten wheat into mud. This rain is different. Gentle, rhythmic, a sound like someone knocking quietly at a door, waiting to be let in. You lie still beneath the patched quilt, listening. Your body tenses out of habit. Memories of flooded fields, swollen rivers, drowned seedlings. But something feels changed. The air is warmer. The scent is new. Not mildew, but soil, green things, a promise beginning to take shape in the dark. When dawn breaks, you walk to the field. The rain still falls, the silver veil over the village, but the earth does not give way beneath your feet. The crops, small, trembling shoots, do not wither or drown. They glisten. They breathe. The leaves turn upward, sipping. You kneel by a row of peas and touch a tendril, no longer curled in fear. It clings gently to your fingertip, as if recognizing you, as if remembering the hands that planted it in the mud weeks ago. Your wife joins you. She stands in the rain without covering her head, letting it bead in her lashes. She smiles, a full smile this time, unguarded and alive. You watch her place a palm over her belly and close her eyes. She hasn't done that in months. You return home soaked through, but you do not build a fire. You let the damp cling to you. It does not chill. It cleanses. That evening, you receive a gift. A true loaf of bread, not imagined, not stolen, not bark mixed or acorn padded. A real loaf, made by the village baker, with flour ground from the first grains, dried and stored from the early ripening patches. It is dense, browned along the edges, split with a crust as firm as stone and fragrant as memory. You carry it home as if it might crumble in your hands from disbelief. At the hearth, your children gather close. Your wife tears it in half, then quarters. The crust cracks, releasing steam that smells of life, of labor, of resilience. You take your piece and hold it a long time before eating. You chew slowly, reverently. It is not sweet. It is not warm anymore. But it is bread. Real bread. You taste the grind of stone in the flour. You taste the hands that sowed and harvested and kneaded. You taste the months it took to bring this small miracle into being. Tears well again, not of sorrow, but of something deeper. Gratitude, perhaps, or the quiet ache of surviving long enough to taste again. Outside, the rain continues, but no one fears it. The children play in it, barefoot and laughing, their arms outstretched like wings. The priest walks among the fields with his sleeves rolled, planting new bulbs, blessing the rows not with incense, but with his footsteps. The scarecrow leans a little farther each day, its hat askew. A bird has nested in its chest. You sit at the threshold of your home, a crust of bread in one hand, your other resting on your son's shoulder. He watches the horizon, where clouds move like slow ships across a blue sea, and for the first time in what feels like a lifetime, you believe in harvests again. You run your fingers along the stone, cold, rough, familiar. The church wall stands where it always has, unmoved by wind or weeping, a witness to all that passed before. But today, its surface changes. Today, it will carry the names. There is no ceremony, no choir, no incense, no tolling bell. Only a handful of villagers, standing quietly with tools in hand. A chisel, a shard of charcoal, the flat end of an old knife. You among them, you with a list folded into your palm. Names, inked in careful letters, though the parchment is frayed at the corners from so much unfolding. The first is your neighbour. You whisper his name to yourself before pressing it into the stone. You had not spoken it aloud in months. He was the one who used to whistle while chopping wood. The one who patched your roof that autumn, gone by frost, buried before the ground froze too deep. You strike the stone gently. The chisel does not yield easily, but slowly the shape begins to form. One by one the others begin their work. Some carve deeply, others mark only the initials. The wall fills not in order, but in memory's rhythm. A mother here, a brother there, a child's name drawn so small you fear the stone might forget it. A boy carves the name of his sister with a stick of coal. He has no chisel. He simply writes it over and over, until his fingers turn black and the letters smudge. The priest comes forward and kneels. He presses his brow to the wall and says nothing. His tears do the talking. You watch as a woman lays a dried flower beside a name, as another places a pebble in a crack between stones. As a man you once saw strike his son writes that son's name with trembling hands and does not stop. By noon, the sun warms the wall enough to make the stone sweat. It feels like breath, like the wall itself is alive, holding the dead close against its chest. There is no pattern, no ranking, no titles, just name. A record not of nobility, but of hunger, of candles burned too quickly, of bellies that could not wait, of voices that slipped into silence before the thought. You step back. Look at what you've made together. It isn't beautiful. It isn't symmetrical. But it is true. And it endures. A child asks why the names must be outside, in the open, where rain can wear them down. An old woman answers softly. So the sky remembers too. Later that evening, you return alone. You bring a bit of bread and leave it beneath the name of a boy who once carved toys for your daughter. You sit beside the wall and watch the light shift across the letters, making them dance like shadows in a firelit room. The wall does not speak, but it listens. And you do too. You close your eyes, and in the stillness, it feels as if every name whispers back. The children gather by the fire. Not many, 6 or 7, their faces lit by orange flame, and the quiet hush of night. They sit on logs and stones, hands tucked into sleeves, eyes wide, not from fear but from waiting. Outside, spring still breathes unevenly, sending mist through the hedges and the scent of wet grass into the air. You sit among them, not as a teacher, not as a leader, but as one who remembers. You begin slowly, not with a tale of kings or saints, but with the first moment the bread disappeared. How the baker's oven stayed cold, how you walked to market and saw nothing but spoiled roots and silence in the stalls. They listen, they fidget. One picks at the bark of a log, another hums softly, the same tune his sister sang when her belly ached in the cold months. You do not silence him. You speak of the rains that would not end, of the mud that swallowed the roads, of grain turned to mildew and milk to poison, of nights spent without light, save the ember of someone's memory. You do not name all the dead, but you speak of them. The woman who traded her shoes for a crust of bread, the boy who gave his last potato to the widow in the corner house, the stranger who arrived with nothing and left behind the seeds that now grow in the garden. You speak their stories not for history, but for holding, for keeping the shape of them alive. One child asks why the famine happened. You do not answer right away. Instead, you pick up a stick and draw a circle in the dirt. This is the earth, you say. Sometimes it sleeps too long. Sometimes we do not listen. Sometimes both. They nod. Not because they understand fully, but because the circle feels familiar. You tell them how people began to forget laughter, how even the tavern songs withered, how hunger stole more than food. It took colour, music, even time. How some days blurred so badly that the moon rose before anyone had spoken aloud. One child, the youngest, asks what saved you. You pause, and then, without thinking, you say a bowl of soup. You describe it, the herbs, the beans, the bone. They gasp as if it were a legend. You speak of hands in the soil, of green things returning, of rain that no longer drowned, that fed. You speak of carving names into stone, of the way silence can become a kind of death, and how telling becomes survival. The children lean closer. One girl places her palm to your knee and says, "Tell it again." You do. You tell it slower this time. You let them ask questions. You let them imagine, not just the sorrow, but the moments of warmth. A candle passed, a song hummed, a mouthful shared. They do not fall asleep. They stay awake, holding the story like a lantern. And as the fire dims to coal, one of them begins to hum the same tune that child once sang in the snow, the one you thought forgotten. Others join in. The tune is simple, wordless, but it holds something. Memory, hope, truth. You smile, not because it is joyful, but because it endures. And because they now carry the story too, the fields are full again. You walk them alone at first light, when the world is still holding its breath between night and morning. Dew glistens along the edges of barley stalks, and every blade of green hums softly with the memory of rainfall. The soil beneath your boots is dark and warm, not soaked, not frozen, but alive. Your hand reaches down to touch it. It yields with ease, parting just slightly, like a sigh. There is something in its feel that wasn't there before, not just fertility, reverence. The earth has learned too. It remembers the hunger, the silence, the weight of footsteps that once walked without hope. You close your eyes, pressing your palm flat against it. You do not pray. You simply listen. The wind moves gently through the crop rows, and it sounds like breath, like sleep, like song. You think of those who are not here, those who should have stood in this same light, whose hands should have held this same soil, the names still carved into the church wall, worn now by weather, but not by memory. You speak them silently, one after another, until the names become rhythm, a beat in the chest, a pulse beneath your ribs. You return home and gather your family. No feast is prepared. No music plays. There is only soup, thick, hot, rich with herbs and lentils, a loaf of bread, cheese, a scattering of spring peas in a chipped clay bowl. The table is not full, but it is enough. You eat together in silence, but it is not the silence of despair. It is the hush of contentment, the calm after the rain. Afterward, your daughter takes your hand and asks if the famine is truly over. You do not lie. No, you whisper. But we are no longer inside it. She nods, as if this makes sense, as if survival can be its own season. You walk again that evening, down the long path where the orchard begins to bloom. Blossoms open like small white prayers on each branch. The bees have returned. You hear them tiny songs between leaves, life's soft chorus, and then without knowing why, you begin to sing. It is not a song you remember learning. It has no words, just breath, tone, vibration, a tune drawn from months of grief, from flickers of hope, from the steady heartbeat of planting and waiting and planting again. The song is not beautiful, but it is true. You hum as you walk, and the song carries to the scarecrow in the rye, to the church bell that no longer tolls for the dead, to the children sitting near the well with crusts of bread and sun on their cheeks. The earth listens, the wind carries it, and for the first time your voice feels like part of something older than sorrow, older than fear, a song stitched from soil and rain, from hunger and hands, from nights that refused to end, and mornings that finally gently came. You stand in the field until the last light fades, the stars blink into being, and the silence is no longer empty. It is full of echoes, of memory, of the fact that you are still here, and that is enough. As the last ember of this story glows and dims, I thank you for walking its long, quiet road. If the journey moved you, or stirred something silent within, consider subscribing, and return again when you seek history that hums softly in the dark. What part of this story stayed with you the most, as the last echoes of hunger fade into spring? May this story rest gently in your heart. Thank you for walking this path through silence and frost. If you wish to wander again through the shadows of forgotten lives, subscribe, and may warmth find you, always before the cold does. Could you have made it through such a winter? What part of this story stayed with you the most?